So to continue with what I was talking about, and to reference that teaching about if one has the faith of a mustard seed, you can go to a mountain and tell it to move and it will move. To me, that teaching, what it's saying is that when he says if one has the faith of the size of a mustard seed, what he's saying is that if one orients oneself even slightly toward the spiritual, slightly toward the inner world, inner reality, the seeming mountain, the seeming obstacle, one can say move, and the obstacle will shift away. The obstacle will remove itself. Now again, let me change my fantasy, the fictional conversation with Jesus. I would say that if one reorients oneself, in other words, if one sort of adopts a tiny bit of faith, in other words, turns toward the spiritual, and one looks at one's obstacle, I don't think one even has to say move. That's an extraneous step. It's that the same obstacle moves by itself. And as I argued in the last thing, it's not that it actually moves away. It becomes like I don't know, this is a really messed up image, but the mountain sort of shifts into a magic carpet ride and gets under the feet and starts flying you in the direction you were going. So it's not that the obstacle simply moves when you tell it to move. It actually becomes like a friend, or the mountain turns into a big giant, and then carries you in its hands and walks you in the same direction that you were headed. So that's what I would tell Jesus. Like, you need to improve your teachings for the modern age here. So anyways, okay, so let me change the angle. The sun's kind of, okay. This is only slot because if I go here, I get the sun in my left eye. If I go here, I get the sun in my right eye, so I'm right here. Anyways, I must be in a spiritual place because I don't have the sun as the obstacle. This is the spiritual location. This is, Anyway, so let's go back to the story. So I was at the Hollywood Bowl. What was my motivation? It was to enjoy music. That was my motivation. I would say that's a worldly, external orientation. So because that was my orientation, these people talking and eating and joking around and going through crinkly plastic and then coming late and all this shit bothered me. They presented an obstacle to my endeavor, to my goal of wanting to listen to, hear, focus on, and appreciate classical music. And if this had been rock music, then it would be so loud that I don't even hear them. So that would have been better. But this is classical music. And anyways, it was a piano concerto. I'm sorry, it was a violin concerto, Brahms. So now, had I gone to that same, and by the way, I've experimented with this. So not this time. But had I gone to that concert with a different motivation, let's suppose my motivation was there could be a number of motivations, but here's one: to practice mindfulness of hearing. In other words, mindfulness of sound, of the act of hearing. Then I would be sitting there and I would be listening to this music, and then people come and they start talking. Instead of thinking this talking is now an impediment to my listening experience, the talking becomes the object of my meditation. I'm not there to listen to music. I'm there to simply listen, to experience to be present to the experience of hearing and listening. So when they start talking, my mind switches to, oh, this is the listening. And then when they go through their food and they're eating and chewing, that's the experience of listening. So what was a seeming obstacle or impediment to what listening to music no longer is an obstacle. And in fact, it becomes a support for my practice of listening. And it's a support because, it's easy to just stay on music and just kind of get fixated on music. but they present an opportunity for my mind to develop greater pliability, flexibility, so it can switch off to that listening. And then when they get quiet, it can go back to the listening, or it can go back to the occasional plane flying overhead. And so if my motivation orientation is on the act of listening, none of these sounds that I hear become obstacle. And again, they become fuel for my practice. I could have gone with another type of motivation. For example, I could have gone with the motivation of becoming more aware of my my expectations of others. Yeah? So, I mean, right? If you heard that first story, you probably heard a lot of expectations that I brought to bear, right? People should arrive on time to a concert. They shouldn't let these people come in after the music starts. These fuckers shouldn't be eating at a classical concert once the music is starting. What are they doing talking, right? And then the second couple, who is not sitting in their reserved seat? Like, people, why aren't people following general rules here? So all these expectations are arising in me. I'm the one that's suffering because I have these, in some ways, nonsensical expectations. But I wasn't there to examine my expectations and to question my expectations. I was there for a singular reason, was to listen to music and try to enjoy it. Instead, I mean, I enjoyed parts of it, but I would say at least 10-20% of the time I wasn't enjoying it at all. I was irritated and annoyed and troubled and stressed out. I mean, but I'm getting a good story out of it. So maybe 10-20% suffering is worth it. Not really. But I can I can justify it. It's very unconvincing to me too. But so had that been my orientation for going, in other words, let's use this evening as an opportunity to allow the situation, the circumstances to surface my expectations and to question them. Then what a rich milieu I put myself in. Instead of sitting in my normal $50, $60 seats, the $1 seats are way better for this, right? It's like riding the metro in LA. That's a great opportunity to practice. But so I've ridden the metro, and you know, for whatever reason, when I get on the metro, that kind of is my attitude, because I already have an expectation, like, this is going to be crazy. A bunch of crazy people are going to get on, so it's an opportunity to sort of have a more flexible attitude. But, you know, going to a concert, especially classical music, right? It's hard to have that attitude. But had I gone with that attitude, what a rich experience I would have had. And all the things that were impediments, yet again, become support. They become sort of the downstream flow for the endeavor, for my goal of inner growth, of bringing light, shedding light upon the kinds of attachments and expectations I hold in my mind around how other people supposedly should behave, right? So that's what I mean. When the orientation is inner or spiritual, when the goal is spiritual, there are no obstacles. Everything becomes support. Everything becomes fodder for the journey. Is that correct? Anyway. And then the second story, right? The second story, I think I hinted at it, but what I didn't mention was that I wasn't happy living in Chico. I've grown up in big cities. And almost the entire time I lived in Chico, I thought, I don't like living in this tiny little town of 100,000 people, if that. And so he asks me, where do you live? And I'm like, oh, Chico, little tiny town in Northern California. And then, okay, being married wasn't a big deal. Not having children was a big deal, but not having a girlfriend or anything, I thought, yeah, that's kind of sad. So not having a girlfriend, living in Chico, in my mind, are obstacles. They're obstacles to my sense of satisfaction or so-called happiness, because my orientation, like, if I care about whether I live in a small town or big city, I would say my orientation is already externally oriented. And if I'm worried about whether I'm in a romantic relationship or not, I would say, again, my orientation is externally fixated at that point. But the Lama clearly was not coming from a place. His orientation was firmly in the spiritual. So all he heard were supports for practice. Small town, meaning less distractions. Cities have way more distractions. No marriage, no kids, no relationship, less distractions. So more time for practice. That's what he saw because of his orientation. Now, had I said, oh, I'm married and I have 10 children from the ages of 1 to 15, I still think he would have said, good. And if I had asked why, I think he probably would have said something like, so many opportunities for practice, right? So do you see how this goes? Is that when the orientation is about inner growth, anything that can otherwise be interpreted as an obstacle, in fact, becomes support. And the capacity to then view events as supports, I would argue, is a reflection of the depth of commitment to an inward view. So if my orientation is marginally spiritual, but very much rooted in the worldly perspective, I think a lot of things will be perceived as obstacles and impediments to my happiness. On the other hand, if I'm a little bit more committed and entrenched in the inward growth and not super involved in external worldly accomplishments and concerns, then almost anything will easily convert itself, in my mind, in my experience, as a support, as fuel for my growth or my happiness. I have an actual example of that. Many years ago, not many years ago, when I was about early 20s, I noticed that I was full of anger and I had a lot of anger issues and I suffered from anger. And then I think when I was around 35, I came across some teachings on working with anger. And when I came across those teachings, part of the teachings were to use any opportunity, any trigger for my anger as a cause for practice. And so anything that triggered me to get upset, angry in any way, I actually found to be like a good event, because I was so grateful that, oh my God, I'm so grateful that I get to practice this and transform my heart and mind. So that's how sort of committed I was to this kind of transformation of mind. And so that's an example from my own life where the commitment was so strong in the inward direction that so for example, had I been in my mid-20s with not as deep a commitment because I hadn't suffered long enough from my own sort of disturbing emotions, had I encountered some of the same kinds of people, I probably would have been like, I don't like these people. They're toxic. They're not good people to be around. Yeah, when the truth was they were simply triggering my own poison. They were simply triggering my own sort of toxicity of my own self. But when I had the tools and the willingness and the commitment to change myself, these same so-called toxic people became the fodder, the fuel, the motivation, the support for my own transformation. So that's yet another example of how I'm trying to paint this picture. I'm trying to offer this image that spiritual growth, again, to recapitulate, is I would argue is defined by our orientation or motivation. And when that motivation is inward, seeming obstacles move. Seeming obstacles of water part. Yeah? But they not only part, they not only move, they actually transform themselves into almost like angels to carry us along the way. Yeah? Into magic carpets. They become our allies. They become our support. And to me, that's the true blessing of moving or orienting oneself in the spiritual or inward direction. All right, I hope that this has at least given you some food for thought.